This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.
Well, hey everyone, it's Mark Bayer, and you are tuned to When Science Speaks. This episode of the show is sponsored by the One for the Week newsletter. One for the Week is a free weekly newsletter sent Sundays to more than 1,000 subscribers. It delivers to your inbox one resource related to presentation skills, writing, persuasion, or stakeholder management you can apply right away to boost your effectiveness on campus, in the corridors of power when talking to policymakers, and across the corporate landscape. Interested in getting free insights in your inbox that help you achieve without the overwhelm? Go to onefortheweek.com. That's onefortheweek.com, onefortheweek.com, and join more than 1,000 One for the Week subscribers. It is wonderful to have Dr. David Giltner on the show today. David is an internationally recognized speaker and mentor on technology commercialization, product development, and career design. He spent more than 20 years developing cutting-edge photonics technologies into commercial products. In 2017, David started Turning Science to provide training and support for scientists of all disciplines seeking to work in the private sector as employees, collaborators, or entrepreneurs. David is the author of the books Turning Science into Things People Need, and It's a Game, Not a Formula. And he also has a new book, Shaping the World, coming out in early 2024. And you can learn more about his new book right now, actually, by going to shapingtheworld.tech. David earned a BS and PhD in physics, and he holds 7 patents in laser spectroscopy and optical communication. Welcome to the show, David. It's so wonderful to have you here.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to be on here. I appreciate the time.
A major focus of your work is teaching scientists how business works and then helping them become more employable in the private sector. I'm wondering, what was your first job like after earning your PhD? And how did you handle the transition from academia to industry?
Yeah, boy, great question. The job was awesome. The transition was challenging. Like so many of us, we don't get much guidance on careers outside academia at university. That was absolutely true coming out of a physics department. So I had to do it on my own. I just decided, since I had worked with lasers, I would go find a company that makes lasers as scientific instrumentation, because then I'd be working with something that I was familiar with from my graduate work. It had nothing to do with the research I did, but it was all around some of the tools I used. And so I ended up at a company called SDL Incorporated in San Jose, Silicon Valley area. And it was really a lot of fun. They were developing what was at the time was a pretty new semiconductor laser technology. So it was a company that had a lot of PhDs because, there's of an art to that. There really still is, but especially at that time, there was so much research and development involved in building systems with semiconductor lasers. So in a way, it made that transition easier because they understood what it was like to be a PhD coming out of a lab and working in a company. And so many of them, all the way up to the CEO, were PhD, either physicists or electrical engineers. So I had a lot of guidance. But still, it was a real transition because, as I teach in my workshops and seminars, working in the industry is not like academic research. A lot of the strengths that you build are valuable, but your working habits end up being very different. And I struggled a lot with that over this first few years, despite having the mentorship.
Sure. And totally normal, of course. And it leads to my next question, because many listeners are interested in how to prepare for and land and thrive in meaningful, stimulating jobs in industry. I'm wondering, for those who have that goal and perhaps who are actually still in their PhD programs right now, how should they prepare to make that journey?
Another good question. 2 major things they can do to prepare. One is think about how you're going to build that career path. We all know the path to become a professor, but there is no path out in the private sector. In my workshops, I actually teach 5 steps for designing your own path. A lot of people go out and they just start dumping the resume out into every online application they can find. That is not a good strategy. That's a good It's a good way to get very frustrated. It's a good way to waste a lot of time.
Mm.
So I have a path for that. There are 5 steps. I'll give you 3 key ones right now. It starts with understanding your strengths, right? Determine your strengths. What are you good at and what are you not good at? Second, I'm really big on define a target. Don't just spray your resume everywhere, your CV everywhere. Identify something you would enjoy doing and go after that, because only if you target can you research and figure out how you can help them. And then third, I know you're big on this, tell great stories. Telling stories is so important. Good at relaying facts, but if you want somebody at a company to understand how you as a scientist can help them, don't just list a bunch of facts and hope they connect the dots. Show them. Stories are a great way to do that. So that's one big thing that, you can talk a lot about, develop that path. Don't just blatantly go out there. But the other big thing is understanding the industry game. You have to understand where you're going. Once you get a job, there will still be challenges. And this is a lot of what I mentioned I struggled with. It's not an academic research lab. There are a lot of things that are different. And so understanding how that game works, what will your manager want from you? You've got lots of strengths, skills, knowledge, but what will they want from you? Because it's not going to be the same things that your academic advisor wanted from you. It's a very different game.
Yes, and we're going to probe that. And also want listeners to know that all of David's 2 books that are already out will be linked in the show notes. And there will be a link to the website I mentioned for his forthcoming book. It probably addresses some of these topics in detail on his books. You are particularly tuned in to the preferences and attitudes of managers in industry working with scientists. And my old boss used to say, it's best to experience mistakes vicariously. Watch other people make them so you can avoid them
Yes.
yourself. And you just alluded to how your manager is not going to expect the same things from you as, say, your advisor or your PI. I want to give listeners the advantage, that kind of vicarious advantage, by asking you, what are some of the common mistakes that scientists make in the private sector and how can they be avoided?
Absolutely. So 3 big things come to mind because as part of my work of my job, having a job in industry and also interviewing a lot of managers, I've gotten a lot of input on what they struggle with, what scientists struggle with. And they come down to 3 big things. First one, I'm amazed how many people say this almost verbatim. The PhD scientists come in and feel they have to be the smartest one in the room. What is going on? What they want, and I totally understand that. And you come out of grad school where you're around a bunch of people trying to get their PhD. Part of the game is showing you're smart, that you have the right answer. That's what schooling and university is about. Doesn't work in a team environment. What your manager needs is for you to be able to, first of all, work with people from a wide spectrum of backgrounds and experiences. You'll be working with technicians that don't even have a university degree, but they've got a lot of knowledge in other areas. You need to respect that. Trying to show you're the smartest and you know everything does not work. You also have to learn from your mistakes. And if we're trying to prove we're smart, we're not good at accepting and learning from mistakes. So that's the first one. Second big thing I hear about is that we don't focus on what really matters and what the company needs us to focus on. And what that usually means is, and this was one of my big struggles, we get so used to being able to follow any novel, interesting thing and pursue it and spend weeks or months learning about it and testing it because it could end up in a paper somewhere. Your manager in industry needs you to focus on how do we get the results, whatever those are, and depending on your job. But in general, it's getting a product out the door or some version of it, right? Or solving a problem, or it's a difference between following curiosity, which you can do in academia, and it's what should be about, and tackling a problem and efficiently solving what's needed for that. The third big thing that I hear about is we struggle to be decisive. We come out of an environment where we don't speak until we're very sure of the answer. We don't publish a paper. We don't defend our thesis. We don't give a conference presentation unless we're pretty sure of our results. We've analyzed the data. Other people have looked at it. When we carry that into industry, our manager gets very frustrated because the timeframes in industry are very different. It's not that we're going to ship something that doesn't work. That's not at all. It's that we have an entire team. We have to start moving down some direction on a product or a solution. They need your recommendation now, and we'll figure it out as we go. But you can't spend an extra 6 months doing the work so that you're not wrong. You have to take a risk and give a recommendation, even though you don't know the answer. We'll figure it out as we go forward. that can be really, we don't like that vulnerability. We're used to mitigating the risk with data and analysis. So those are the three big things that managers complain about, and we need to learn to provide what they need.
Thanks for being so specific on that, David. A lot of people talk about how the corporate culture is a lot different than academia, but they don't really delve so deeply into the specific mindset, high level mindset, but then the really specific examples that you're providing, of course, that comes from your depth of experience in
Yeah.
industry as well as in academia. Very, very helpful. So you're also, as I mentioned before, you're the author of three books. Your third book is coming out. We talked about so interviews with scientists and academic collaborators. Can you provide a little bit of detail about your first two books, their themes and
Mhm.
their takeaways, and also what readers can expect in your forthcoming third book?
Absolutely. So the first book I wrote came out in 2010, is Turning Science into Things People Need. And when I did that, I just had an opportunity. I met this publisher. I thought, hey, a book would be great. What do I do? And I came up with this idea of interviewing other scientists who had also worked in industry. I was actually looking for a job at the time, and I thought I would love to have had that book when I was emerging and trying to look for my first job. I hadn't thought about it much, so I interviewed a bunch of scientists who had built successful careers in industry, and I put 10 of them in the book. So, a lot of great content, stories from those 10. Some of them are entrepreneurs, but I didn't have any of my own ideas yet. So, that's what the first one's message. The theme, I think the best way I'd say it is that I felt that really justified it. Yes, scientists can find exciting and rewarding jobs outside of academia. I knew I had done it myself, but it was great to collect more data. My second book is It's a Game, Not a Formula. And this is a pandemic project because I travel the world giving workshops and things. I was in Germany at the time when the travel restrictions came on in March 2020, and I had to cancel month's worth of work. And I was sitting at home in my office thinking, now what do I do? And I thought, now I've learned a lot since my first book. I have a lot of my own ideas, specifically about how do you play the industry game. And that is what's in that book. So
Mhm.
the theme, if I were to, it's really a lot of advice. How is industry different than academia? What are some of the stereotypes, PhD stereotypes you have to watch out for? What are some very important working habits that your manager will be looking from you? In short, the theme of this is if you want to be successful in industry, you need a playbook. It's a game, you need a playbook. This is your playbook. So that's what that's about. My third book, in a way, in short, it's what this book would have been if I had been in this business longer. And interviews in this. In the meantime, I've collected so many more interviews. I collected a lot more for my second book, although I only included excerpts in here. And I thought, I've got so many stories now, full interviews telling the full stories of these scientists. I want to share those and put in some of my own insight about how they finish some common themes and what the takeaways are. So it really explores that whole question of, can a scientist find a rewarding career, in industry or working with industry? I have a whole section on scientists who get jobs, who become employees. I have a whole section on scientists who started companies and are doing that. And I will have a whole section on scientists who working in academia, but they're collaborating with the private sector. It's a fairly new area in the last few years I've really become interested in because it really works to break down some of that us versus them mentality. Academia is where true science is done. Oh, industry is the only place where practical things are done. Yes, they each have their own benefit, they each have their own value, but real innovation comes from synergy between the two. And these collaborators are showing that. We don't have to pick one or the other or say one is better than the other. Let's develop both of them and let's find ways to help them work together because we need both.
It's such a great point for a variety of reasons I see it. One is that, first of all, industry needs academic science. And there are
Absolutely.
lots of interested in people, investors, industry, interested in deep tech, what's going to be the next big thing. And then as you referenced, breaking down this mindset that somehow going to industry is an alternative career, and that's
Right.
sometimes said with a pejorative tone. So putting them both together, and really everyone is a winner. We're all a winner when innovations can emerge and new treatments and new ways of doing things that benefit society come out of these collaborations. So I'm so glad that you're highlighting that. David, you also talked about, and that you're all over the world doing workshops, talking to people. I'm wondering if there are things that listeners who are tuning in, say from countries around the world, should keep in mind when interviewing and working outside the US. I guess what my question really is, are attitudes about working with PhD in industry, are they varying in cultures, just in different cultures outside of the US? Just things that listeners should think about if they're perhaps doing international collaborations or they're non-US scientists and they're going to be studying, you're going to be coming to the United States, maybe as a trainee or as a visiting professor or something of that sort.
Yeah. So, good question. It's been fun to sample that, to understand, to see how business works around the world. I did that in my jobs before I started this, and now I speak in as many countries and continents as possible. So the interesting thing, there are absolutely different social customs, right? Those differ around the world. And sometimes people ask me about that in looking for a job, but I tell them the details of how you might communicate, leadership, how that's seen, giving negative feedback, all that does vary. But the essence of business is the same around the world. And so when you talk about the game and how you play that game, that is essentially the same. But the social differences and how you communicate are important. So this comes back to stories, I think, are a great way to communicate, especially for somebody looking for a job. One of the things I hear a lot is people will say, "Well, say in Europe is one good example. People will say, I feel like I'm bragging if I talk too much about the good things that I've done. I understand that. Hey, I'm an American. We're supposed to be great at bragging, and I still am uncomfortable with it. Telling stories is an awesome way to do that. Instead of saying, hey, I'm really good at this, I've done this really well, just describe something that happened and show them what you're able to do. That's a great way to relay it and get across so many cultural differences. Everybody enjoys a story, everybody understands it, and you're helping them see on their own how you could help by showing them an example, not having to brag, not having to feel like you're bragging. Just tell stories. That is one of the most powerful things you can do.
Great advice. And it's specific. You're going to have the attention of your audience as they're visualizing what you're describing. Just so many wonderful elements to that. And you'll be comfortable telling it. Sometimes people will use, we, the T, for things like to mitigate this feeling that it's all about me and bragging. So just great advice, David. So as we wrap up, we're talking today in October 2023. We're approaching the fourth quarter of the year, unbelievably. Looking ahead to 2024, of course, you've got your book coming out early on in the year next year. In addition to that, do you have any goals, personal or professional, for next year that you'd like to share?
Yeah, obviously my book, as you mentioned, that is a big one, but that one I'm hoping to wrap up most of that pretty soon. My big focus coming up in this year, I've got two new workshops that are pretty new that I'm looking at expanding on. One is building a scientific consultancy side gig. I developed this for the University of Edinburgh about a year ago, and it was a big hit, and I'm looking at expanding that more. Turns out if you have some time, I know sometimes PhD candidates have little extra time, but sometimes postdocs do. There are a lot of ways you can use your strengths. So that's one I'm looking at expanding. The other is startup basics for scientists. There's a lot of interest in entrepreneurship. And a lot of scientists wonder if they can be entrepreneurs. Of course, the idea of commercializing their science is relatively common, but the idea that can a scientist actually start a company and be good at it? That's another thing I'm a big proponent of because I've met so many that have done a good job. There are things you have to watch out for. There are ways being a scientist helps you, and there are ways it can be a challenge and you have to pay attention. So I've got a new workshop, Startup Basics for Scientists, that walks people through what is it really all about if you're thinking of starting your own company or if you're just thinking about going out and working in one. This will give you an idea what it's like. Those are the big thing for next year that I'm looking at growing.
Fantastic. We're going to have a link to David's website so that people can keep updated on all of his doings, including the further rollout of those two workshops, which both sound fantastic. Thanks for taking time out of your schedule to share really so many nuggets of wisdom and sharing your experience. Very relevant for our listeners. So just wonderful stuff. It's great to have the chance to talk to you again.
Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate you having me on your podcast. It's fun. It's been a fun conversation, and I appreciate the time.
Wonderful. And listeners, thank you for being here on this episode of When Science Speaks. And I hope you'll be back next time for the next episode of When Science Speaks.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe. Check us out on the web at whensciencespeaks.com, and we'll see you next time.